I'm fascinated by the cosmology or the worldview that we live in as a Western society. That, like as you said to begin with, that we don't even have this idea embedded in our language as the Chinese do. And so this is very interesting because in terms of medicine, when you go to a GP, mostly people would think it would be absurd to say that, for that GP to say, well, actually your medicine would be to connect with the magic of life, because that's what's missing in your life. And so...
They'd probably be struck off the register.
Exactly.
Someone might report them for saying something like that, which is absurd, as you said. On one hand, yes, I can see how that's absurd in the medical field, but on the other hand, after listening to even a little bit of this, it seems like, well, isn't it absurd that you don't mention that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I originally presented this, and I worked it back, but it was about a patient who was experiencing some sort of depression, I guess, and what I felt from it was that rather than it just being merely, say, a stagnation of chi or anything like that, it was actually a fundamental disconnection with the magic of life. And this is very common, I think, in modern society, especially here in the West, because we tend to live, we can get trapped in a very sort of mundane existence of living our day-to-day working life. And so then that sort of sense of magic that is inherent within life itself gets sort of blocked from view. And this person had seemed to have been disconnected from their, like Lonnie Jarrett says, their real potency and their real efficacy in the world. So they didn't really believe in themselves, but also they'd sort of lost that sense of purpose and magic. Now, interestingly, when we joke about becoming a dancing shaman, but interestingly, when this person went dancing, then they would feel much better. And so it was this actually dancing in this creative act which awoke this sense of I guess joy and positivity and purpose in life. And then it was that act of going back to the sort of mundane existence and the frustrations of working, and they would get lost in that, and then that would, and so they would look for that weekly dance session to actually connect with those, I guess you could say, heavenly energies. So it's actually quite fitting for that character in itself.
Yeah, because I think a thing that's, it's not a surprise to anyone watching this, I would say, but it's so common now in our society that we work for money rather than working because we want to do that thing. Maybe we started out, and I see lots of patients like this that started out in a job that they loved because they wanted to do it, and they went into that career because they wanted to do it, and so there was a purpose and there was a desire for it, but then somewhere along the way it just became this mundane, boring thing that they've lost connection with it and they don't want to do it anymore, but they can't get out of it because they don't want to lose their house or their car, or they need to provide for their kids and their family. And it's a trap because then they're like working or spending the majority of the time, half the time sleeping, half the time working in this thing they hate, and only living for like a few hours a week or the weekend to enjoy. And what do they do? And it's like then the treatments that they do sort of don't cut it. They might help a little bit, so they do acupuncture, they do herbs, even Western medicine, like antidepressants or medications that people start taking. And I'm not saying don't take those medications, but they can help to a certain point. But then what about that little gap? And maybe this is connecting. I'm going to connect with people about that little gap that, is missing. That you could try everything physically till the cows come home, but if you don't fix that issue, if you don't connect with your purpose, then it's maybe what is it all for?
Exactly. And it actually can be explained by how we view the world as a Western culture. And I'm very interested in these types of things, and I've learned a bit on a course from Rick Tarnas, who's a philosopher, psychologist from the United States, and he talks about the shift in worldviews, and this was very influential to my thinking, and also it ties in with Ling, because previously, in older time periods, human beings were, I guess, embedded in the universe in a way in which they could, nature was perceived to be ensouled, and so that it wasn't just human beings that had a creative intelligence, but rather all of nature and all the universe had this sort of inner potency and this
Right.
creative intelligence, I guess you could say. And it was around the time of the so-called Enlightenment and the Copernican Revolution, all these things, that that outer world became, they say, disenchanted. And so, and this has led to the current worldview in which basically consciousness is an epiphenomenon, they say, of matter and of material processes, and that only human beings really have this intelligence. And so Ling, that character coming from an ancient time period, sort of speaks to that, and meaning, spiritual and even magical, sort of relates to that way in which all of nature is has a spiritual potency,
Yeah, right.
and that we can actually connect with that. And so I was thinking about it, and it's interesting because if you were to look at a Chinese medical classic, probably they would never say that if in this disorder, get them to connect with Ling.
Mm.
Because it didn't need to be said, because the worldview in which they were living was a more magical, mythical worldview in which that was a given.
People already were.
They already were inside that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, like if you look at the Shen Nong Ben Cao Jing, like an old herbal classic, and you look up Longgu, where the Longgu was, where it was found, it says in on the banks of rivers and caves and grottos where dragons have lived and died, and they certain herbs will be used for ghosts and spectral entities, and this magical sort of thinking was within the Chinese culture for a very long time. Even Sun Simiao in the sort of medieval times would use incantations and almost like magical type.
It's really good, and I think one part about, just going back to what you were saying before about that it was embedded into the culture and that's what didn't need to be mentioned. There's been this push in Chinese medicine, especially in our country, in Australia, and there are lots of people watching this from the US or the UK, and it's very similar there as well, to westernise things, like what they call modernise things, and bring things into line with a more scientific, a Western scientific approach of how we talk about Chinese medicine. And there's nothing wrong with understanding things from different paradigms, I think, and using that paradigm. But I almost feel like this paradigm of the linguistics and the understanding and the true nature of Chinese medicine is being lost amongst the need to show scientific proof for what works, because it's hard to... You could design a research trial where you've got people to discover their purpose and see what happened, but it's probably much more in line with psychology than what is in stock standard Chinese medicine. So even like you're saying, it would be you'd be hard pressed to come to a doctor and for them to say, "Hey, you're feeling depressed. Have you thought about your purpose lately? Have you thought about how's that going?" But even a Chinese medicine practitioner probably won't go there as a matter of just general conversation, right?
Yes, and but I think it's a hugely important thing, because I think part of our evolution as modern human beings is to reconnect with what we have lost.
Yeah.
Which is that understanding of the intelligence of nature, and to be able to connect with nature in the sense that these shamans are connecting with the rain in that sense, and to regain a bit of that notion that we are living within an ensouled universe, and that things aren't just dead, inert.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because maybe people are thinking, I'd like to reconnect with my purpose. What do I need to do? How do they connect? How do they understand this interconnectiveness of nature?
Well, actually, it could be many different things. That I remember I was listening to an interview with Lillian Bridges, who's a face reader and really wonderful woman, by all sounds of it, and she was talking about Ling, and she looked at someone, she had a patient, and she looked at him and she said, "Oh, you're Ling deficient," or something like this. And then he said, "Okay," and she said her prescription for him was to go outside every day, lie on the grass and just look at the clouds. And and then just doing this, then like he went back a few weeks later and he was feeling much better, and he explained to her how much but he was feeling a real transformation. And now this may seem absurd to some people, but really it's the simple act of connecting with the magic of life that can be the greatest medicine at times. So for this person, just lying down on the grass and looking at the clouds and reconnecting with that fundamental sense of awe and mystery and wonder at the fact that there are clouds existing at all. And so this is something that is sort of inborn in us when we're children, and we can look at all things and we can see the magic in it. But as we grow and our priorities get diverted into education and these types of things, Lonnie Jarrett, based on the work of a Taoist practitioner called Liu Yiming, calls it sort of the mundane accretions. So when we're living, we build up these accretions, I guess. Yes.
What's an accretion?
Accretion, like I think of it as sort of like a solidification. So this is yin, whereas our true nature, say, is yang. So it's like
sediment building up on something,
exactly.
right?
So it's a sediment that is an influence of the I guess the mundane material world.
Sediment of the mundane.
Exactly.
I'm sure lots of people can relate to that. It's like, oh, just another day of sediment.
Exactly.
Here we go again. It's so true. It's so true. And I think the reason why maybe people do think, oh, that's absurd. Like they go to a doctor and imagine being prescribed 10 minutes in nature. And I've seen some articles floating around. I'll see if I can post some up here. I'll put the link below of doctors in other, it's more European countries I've seen doing that, prescribing people nature walks and stuff like that as part of their treatment. And there's been some research on these areas because it's like, well, I could have just got that myself, but you're not. Like I could have just, I didn't come to you for sunshine and rainbows. I came to you for medication that, like, it's like the doctors are the gatekeepers to this stuff. Whereas maybe they should be the facilitators, or when I say doctors, I mean healthcare workers, including myself in those things. Like we should be the facilitators of this knowledge and and helping people towards a path. It's not just necessarily, well, I need to sell you this medication. I need to give you something you can't get anywhere else. It's, and I think people maybe they don't value it as much, like the 10 minutes of sunshine or lying in the grass looking at the clouds, because they think, well, I could have just done that myself.
Exactly.
Well, if you watch this podcast, you might be able to just do it. You might be able to just do it yourself. But
and it's interesting because that leads to almost like a redefinition of what the practitioner is and what they do, because really they should have the best interest of the patient. So whether that, perhaps a patient needs weeks of acupuncture and herbs, and yet another one might simply need to be, led down a path that leads them just to looking at clouds, for example, or doing something of that nature.
And look, I think practitioners who do prescribe, let's say they don't prescribe the sunshine and rainbows, they just prescribe they're doing the best they can with what they know. And maybe we could argue that they should know better, and they could expand their consciousness and they could expand their ideas, but a lot of practitioners and doctors are doing it with their best. They think they've got their patient's best interest at heart. For sure. I mean, always have the other side of the coin where people are, doing it for money and trying to sell you something. But let's not get into a debate about the pharmaceutical industry on this today. Let's keep it nice.
Nor am I anyone to talk, because I'm not even a practitioner. So.
That's all right. But when you are, you'll get your fair share of comeuppance, I'm sure. You get your backlash. Anyway, so people can connect with nature in some way. So it might be something that they might seem insignificant. This is what I'm picking up from what you're saying. It might seem just like a little thing, but it is actually going to give you big returns if you actually engage in doing it, and you'll.
Absolutely.
So if you really like this content and you want to see more of it, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button. You can share the videos with your friends and family, and I hope it's been useful and helpful to you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And we might have Glenn back on to talk about more stuff, because he's a wealth of knowledge. And so thank you so much, Glenn, for being on the podcast. And
thank you very much for having me. It's been an honour to be here.
Fantastic.
Thank you.